Hey guys, this is Ryan from My Fishing Cape Cod, and happy Memorial Day weekend. Typically these podcasts, when we publish them, they're immediately available only to members of My Fishing Cape Cod. But this holiday weekend, we want to do something different and make this podcast available to the general public as soon as we publish it. Have a listen, tight lines, take care, and let me know if I can help with anything.
Welcome to the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast. The My Fishing Cape Cod podcast is your local source for the latest news and information on fishing Cape Cod. Now, here's your host, Kevin Collins.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast presented by Cape and Islands Mitsubishi and Cape Codder Boats. I'm your host, Kevin Collins, back with you for our last May episode of the 2023 season. The month has flown right by and we are headed right into beautiful Memorial Day weekend. The weather looks fantastic. It looks like the wind is going to lay down and let a lot of folks get out on the water, which is going to be an extremely enjoyable thing for everybody heading down Cape this weekend. We've got an action-packed show in store for you today. We're going to be joined by MFCC Founder and Creator Ryan Collins. We're then going to be joined by Sam Mullen of the Goose Hummock down in Orleans. Next up will be Captain Steve Leary of Wingman Charters. We'll then head down to Yarmouth to check in with Lee Brover and our friends down at Riverview Bait and Tackle. And last but not least, we'll head on out to Falmouth to check in with Evan Eastman of Eastman Sport and Tackle. During this podcast, we're going to discuss a wide variety of topics and species. We'll dive right into the black sea bass fishery that opened up last weekend. Ryan and I had a chance to get out yesterday and target those. We'll also talk about the red-hot scup bite happening out in Buzzards Bay in Nantucket Sound. And we're obviously going to talk about the striper fishery, which has been red-hot since the start of the season, dating all the way back really to the beginning of May here on Cape Cod. We'll cover Buzzards Bay, Vineyard Sound, Nantucket Sound, Cape Cod Bay, and so much more. So we really hope you enjoy this edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast, and let's dive right in. Well, up first on this week's edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast, as always, is proud MFCC founder and creator Ryan Collins. Ryan, how are you today?
Doing great, Kevin. Just filleting some sea bass from our trip yesterday.
That sounds lovely. I look forward to making a trip down there and getting a few hunks of that for myself. Let's start there. That's a good spot to start. We actually got a chance to get out on a boat together yesterday and do some fishing for probably the first time in close to a year.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think the last time we went out together might have been on the 12-foot aluminum boat off Plymouth last year when the Pogey bite was happening. So it was good to get back out on the water with you. So
we targeted sea bass yesterday, and we were out with MFCC member Bruno Demir on his beautiful boat, the Gaviota, and we departed from Saquatucket, early in the morning, and it was pretty cool. I'll let you tell the story from there, but we ended up with a variety of different species on board.
We definitely did. It was a nice mixed bag trip, which Bruno is famous for, and pretty much the stretch from Hyannis all the way down to Mashpee. We covered a bunch of spots, and I was really impressed by Bruno yesterday. He's got a good fish instinct. Started kind of close to a fleet of boats, but got the sense that we should move off on our own a little bit. And we started, Kevin, as you remember, when we were closer to that big fleet of boats that, included the Helen H and some of the party boats. We were catching some really big scup, some of the biggest scup I've seen in a while. And then once Bruno decided to move a little west, we got into some beautiful sea bass, and the sonar was just lit up. And as you know, it probably only took us maybe an hour and a half of fishing to limit out on sea bass.
Yeah, and the other interesting part about, I'll say our strategy that Captain Bruno put out there yesterday for you and I as his crew was we went from baiting our jigs to not baiting our jigs. And when we started to not bait our jigs, it seemed like we got a little bit larger quality of sea bass. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, and we stopped catching the scup almost immediately. So that's a good tip. But, the scup were so big that I would definitely devote a full day just to scup fishing right now. There's some really nice scup. And I'd imagine there's some big scup in Buzzards Bay as well. I haven't been out to try, but it's that time of year where you get some beautiful big scup in Buzzards Bay as well as over in the Sounds.
And can we give a little bit of a tease? I know you probably haven't had a chance to review everything from yesterday's trip, but you had a camera down there among the scup as they were feeding on our baited jigs, didn't you?
I sure did. I dropped the camera down to the bottom, and I reviewed the footage briefly, but I saw some beautiful schools of scup, beautiful schools of black sea bass. I've always wanted to get a shot of a camera laying on the bottom as a school of black sea bass passed by, and I think I got that yesterday, finally. And I also saw a really big, I believe, smooth dogfish, which is a small shark, swim right by the camera. And, of course, plenty of sea robins as well, which we caught some yesterday.
Certainly was a great trip, productive, got home safe and with a limit of sea bass, as you mentioned. So very much looking forward to my first sea bass dishes of the season. With the website, Ryan, I know it's been a busy week. You've been out fishing. You also had a chance to put up a new podcast that we've put up with MFCC member Calvin Torrin Sandlin. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? It was a great chat I had with him earlier this week.
So there's certain members inside our forum who are definitely advanced anglers. You know, I've gotten to the point in my fishing career where I have a certain degree of knowledge, but there's a lot of people who just far exceed what I can create or offer on my own. And that's why we team up with people like Calvin, is to provide that more advanced tutorial, more advanced information about techniques, moon phases, tides, and surf casting. If you want it to be, it can be a very technical, strategic gig, or it can just be go out and see what happens, or anything in the middle between those two ends of the spectrum. So what we did with Calvin and what I see happening moving forward is every 2 weeks publishing a very in-depth tutorial, advanced angler type podcast with Calvin, because he has so much to offer, but also include a report of what he's been seeing the past few days, as well as a forecast of what he expects to come. And that's exactly what we just published yesterday. I thought you had a great conversation with him, and it's live on the site. If you're a member of My Fishing Cape Cod, you'll see it right now. May 25th surfcasting report. Got a picture of Calvin with a beautiful fish that was probably over 35 pounds. I know he's been fishing hard the past few nights and scratching up some really big stripers. That's available, and that's really a focus for me moving forward, especially throughout 2023, is trying to create more content for the more advanced anglers in our community. Because My Fishing Cape Cod, everybody knows it's a great place to get started fishing, but I also want it to be an even better place to take your fishing game to the next level.
And I know along those lines, you also have an idea coming up here. I want to give you a second to talk about that as well, with Patrick Sebile.
Yes, I've been having conversations with Patrick for probably a couple months now, trying to figure out a good way of providing exactly what we're talking about, Kevin. Patrick Sebile holds numerous IGFA world records. He's fished here extensively on Cape Cod, but also all around the world, using all sorts of various techniques. And his mind, with regards to equipment in particular, is astounding. Talked to me for 30 minutes the other day about braided line, and just enlightened me about so many aspects of braided line that I had never, ever even thought to consider. So right then and there, I said, Patrick, we've got to do something with you and My Fishing Cape Cod to share your knowledge with our members. So Patrick and I are hashing this out, how it's got to work. Could be something similar to Calvin, where we have him on as a regular basis here on the podcast, maybe do some members-only videos, talking specifically about fishing gear and fishing techniques for more advanced anglers to really get your game up to the level that a guy like Patrick Sebile is at. So stay tuned for that. I'm very excited about that.
And I also understand we have another exciting announcement that we're going to have Sportsport in Yarmouth joining our weekly podcast here.
Yes, I've been talking to Amy over at Sportsport, and she's excited to hop on the podcast, contributing bi-weekly. I think it's awesome. Just another extension, another way to expand what we're offering here on MFCC. And I'm going to be talking to more bait shops and tackle shops, even off Cape, because I know a lot of us, we fish Plymouth, we fish the South Shore, we fish Boston, we fish the North Shore, the islands, and Rhode Island. So even though we'll always be Cape Cod based, we can still serve some of the members in our community who live and fish these other areas as well.
And I also see you've got something on My Fishing Rhode Island. Explain what that's about.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, Kevin. There's a lot of people here who summer on Cape Cod but live in Rhode Island. They fish both places. There's a big overlap in our membership there. So I'm going to create a sub-forum for members, which is just, a free bonus if you want as part of the membership for right now. My Fishing Rhode Island, a sub-forum that is specifically about fishing Rhode Island. I've got about 100 members already who have expressed interest in joining this sub-forum, and I've almost got it ready to go. I was hoping to get it ready to go for the spring season, but my goal now is to get it ready to go for summer, and it's just another attempt for me to add more value to the membership for those people who are here because of Cape Cod, but they also fish Rhode Island. So just another value add, and more details to come. I hope to have it launched before summer.
Awesome. And the last thing I want to hit on before I let you go, Ryan, is the virtual guide service.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to talk about that for a minute. I get lots of requests from people who want a higher degree of service. Say, for example, they're planning a trip to Cape Cod. They want to make the most of their trip. They want to explore some new areas. They're looking for a level of information that maybe isn't available in the articles and in the videos, or maybe they don't feel like sifting through the vast database that we have of content. So this virtual guide service, if you're interested, I've done it before for a higher monthly fee. I'll work with you one-on-one, whether via phone call or email, to just help you take your fishing to the next level, to take your Cape Cod knowledge to the next level, or to actually plan trips for you and with you. And it's just a way of getting more of a one-on-one guide service, but virtually. I might not be able to be with everybody one-on-one on trips, but I'm more than happy to speak with you one-on-one to give you a better level of service. So if you're interested in that virtual guide service, just send an email to Ryan at myfishingcapecod.com, and we can take it from there.
All right, Ryan, I'll let you get back to filleting those beautiful sea bass that we caught yesterday, but really appreciate you taking a break in that to chat with us here on the show, and we look forward to hearing from you next week.
Looking forward to hearing the rest of the updates from everyone on the show today, and happy Memorial Day weekend.
Well, next up on this week's edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast is our good buddy Sam Mullen from down behind the counter at the beautiful Goose Hummock shop in Orleans, Mass. Sam, how are you today?
I'm great, Kevin. The weather's been beautiful, and I had another morning where I limited out on sea bass before work, so I'm pretty happy.
The Sea Bass Open, Sam, I believe it was May 20th. We've got some new rules and regulations in terms of catch limit. Size limit, I believe, is now 16.5 inches. Why don't you tell people what it's been like through the first 3 or 4 days of the sea bass fishery?
Yeah, the first 2 days, not many guys went because it was snotty weather, but I went out there this morning. Boats were starting to definitely pile in around, out of Bass River. There was quite a few guys starting to go out, and, they're very aggressive. I saw a few squid following my bucktails this morning and yesterday morning as well. So there's plenty of squid on the reefs and in the rock piles and, pretty much all of Nantucket Sound. And a lot of the fish are very healthy, and they got, big fat tummies. So it's going to be great for the dinner table.
How'd you guys do in terms of numbers? Did you guys limit out?
Yep, limited out. Took us probably about an hour. It's great to go before work and kind of de-stress yourself from a busy day.
And just to refresh everybody, the limit's 4 fish per person now, correct?
Yes, 4 fish, not 5 fish anymore, and they bumped it up 1.5 inches. So it's quite a difference, because you get a lot of those 15-inch fish that you would be able to keep last year, and you got to throw them back, which is good. because it does definitely get hit hard the first 2 weeks. But like I said, it's just starting to get, actually fished. Those, the tire pile, is obviously the biggest one. It's the most accessible. It's a mile out of, Bass River. So, but there's plenty of other spots you can hit though. The School Reef is another good one, and Monomoy coming up too. You can fish the rips, so that'll be cool.
So the mouth of Bass River was productive for you. It's great to hear you limited out with your crew this morning. Can you give us a little bit of detail in terms of what the tide was doing, maybe how much water you were in?
Yeah. So it was an incoming tide. They're not so much tidal, on the Sound side. It's because it's only such a small tide. So it was a good little chop. It was kind of nice at dead sticking, which was nice. It was been northeast, east the past 2 mornings, and tide was moving good though, and we were just, dead sticking. Actually, Ron Z's worked really well, and what do you call it? We got the new squid treks, and I was like, oh yeah, it's the squid treks and everything, but those baits work really, really, really well. I could not believe when we were jigging them, and we were actually casting them out and letting them sink and slowly retrieving them, and I caught two on one rig.
That's awesome. So you guys pretty much stuck to that. You didn't use any like freshly dead bait or anything like that?
No, we stripped a few. There's actually got these new Ron Z, kind of like a flare hawk bucktail jig, and it had a paddle tail, and I stripped it a few times with some squid, and I got a few like 17, 18 inches on that, and that was great. Just kind of start the morning. I just wanted to kind of brush off the dust and get one, and then but as the day went on, I started using those squid treks, and the 110 size was casting, retrieving those, and then dropping down the 130 size, and they have a brown speckled color it just looks like a squid in the water. It's unbelievable.
And I was going to ask, the size range of the fish, Sam, did it fluctuate at all between using like freshly dead and artificial baits?
Yeah, the smaller the jigs that we were using, we were catching definitely dinks.
Okay.
Little small ones, 10, 12-inch ones. But as I started to use the bigger squid treks, I was starting to get 16 to almost 20-inch fish, which was great.
And in terms of striped bass, Sam, I know the sea bass is going to dominate the conversation here over the next couple of weeks, and it's such a great, table fare eating fish. But give me a quick synopsis of what you're hearing about striped bass over the past couple of weeks since we've chatted.
Yeah, I mean, the striped bass fishery is unbelievable. That's why I feel like people haven't even been targeting, the sea bass and tog. It's just people have been catching such big fish, they're just going for fun, because like you said, the table fare, the sea bass is dominant over everything else, which is great. That's what I like to do. But if you want to have a nice fun afternoon catching 40-plus inch bass on topwater and then, trolling, deep diving plugs and vertical jigging, that you'll have a ball. And Cape Cod Bay is still on fire.
So in terms of Cape Cod Bay, let's focus on that for just a second. What are you hearing in terms of shore opportunities in Cape Cod Bay?
Pretty much, anywhere on the, from Dennis area and the flats. You fish at night, and you fish on creeks on an outgoing tide, and there's still so many herring. The herring is just unbelievable, which is just great to see, that it's actually coming back. And it was struggling there for a few years, but so there's just so much of that. So that's your best night bait, and then, any kind of onshore wind, just using pencil poppers is so much fun. And then just using swimming plugs like SB minnows and the Schwarters and stuff like that, and hydro minnows from Yozuri at night, it's like a sure thing almost,
Are you guys hearing about any mackerel in the bay?
Yeah, there's a good amount of mackerel around, the Sassuat area to the fingers, and being able to, just get them on sabiki and live line on those. But yeah, like I said, the bass bite's so good you wouldn't even bother trying to even live line. It's, save your time and just vertical jig and get into some really deep water is fantastic. And then using deep divers, has been wicked effective, which is nice for the family. You get 2 deep divers out, and no casting, no nothing, and it's pretty fun.
Yep, and I know one other thing that I always like to start asking about. It might be a little too early, but a lot of the guys in the shop, right, employees and customers, like to surf cast the Nauset area. Have you heard any fish in that area as of yet?
No. Fish are starting to pour into the cove and into Nauset Marsh area like that. So there's fish out front, but there's nothing in size. we haven't heard anything. And I like to fish that not till June, because I mean I'm fishing that pretty much for the rest of the year. So when I can enjoy the bay and have such a good fishery, I just stick with that. Because by the time late June, early July, the bay starts to kind of push out. The fish starts to push out more towards Plymouth, and then obviously that's when the backside truly heats up and acts like the outer Cape of what it has been for the many years ago, and it's been fantastic. So.
Well, I'm marking it down in my little journal here that our next visit will happen in the beautiful month of June. So I'll make sure to ask about it again, and hopefully fish show up in numbers in that area, because I know it's an area, like I mentioned, not only do a lot of the guys at the shop, but a lot of the customers love to fish that area from shore.
Absolutely. It's been such a hot ticket the past few years, and I have just moved to Orleans 2 years ago, and I'm a 2-minute drive from the shop and 2 minutes from Nauset Beach, so it's the most convenient thing, and I'll probably maybe even do it when I get my outer beach sticker this weekend. I might go out there and even just go chunking and have a few beers and see what can strike up for a bite, So I'm sure there'll be fish down there, and it'll be a great summer ahead fishing the outer Cape beaches.
Well, you mentioned Memorial Day weekend and, getting the beach sticker, getting everything kind of open up for the season. What's going on at the Goose for Memorial Day weekend in terms of, you got any specials going on, anything new you want to talk about?
Just those squid treks. We got a ton of them in, and if you want to catch some sea bass, I would buy those before they start to fly off the those Ronzi flare hawk jigs. Those are new from Ronzi, and we just got them in too. So we're just hanging them on the shelf, and those things are fantastic. It's about 2.5 ounces, and very easy to use. And they'll probably be great for striped bass too. So.
All right, Sam, we'll let you go enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day week. Hopefully you get some time to yourself this weekend, and we look forward to catching up with you in another couple weeks.
Absolutely. Sounds great, Kev. Great talking to you.
Well, next up on this week's edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast is our good buddy Steve Leary of Wingman Charters. Steve, how are you on this beautiful day?
I'm doing really great, sitting on my deck in West Barnstable, enjoying the somewhat autumn chill in the year, but knowing the fishing's great, I can't wait to get back out there. Next year, I'll be booking much earlier than I typically do. I usually start my charters Memorial Day weekend, as do a lot of the charter captains, but I've been in the big fish for 3 weeks now in the bay. My boat's being re-engined down to Goose Hummock with new Suzukis. I was blessed to have the connections there with Phil to get me on the Suzuki charter captain program. So that'll be done this week, but I've been running another boat. 3 trips were out there, total of 8 hours.
Wow.
Just hunting, landed 50 fish between 28 and 48 inches, all on live mackerel.
That's amazing. And are the mackerel hard to find or easy to find?
First couple trips, they were everywhere. They're moving around quite a bit. But, we're still early in the season, so things are still setting up. But by far, I've been fishing the bay 30 years, the best spring I've ever had.
Well, that's great to hear. And the size and class of these fish, for the time of year that we're in, it seems to be those giant fish, those breeders that we call them, seem to have arrived a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, even the big fish, these girls and boys have been working out over the winter. They are not skinny. I recall a couple years ago I caught my first bass. It was 47 inches at Billingsgate Shoal on the live mac, and the thing was maybe mid-20 pounds. These fish are full of energy and all bulked up, healthy, just in phenomenal good shape.
So other than live mackerel, which obviously seems to be your preferred method for what's going on right now, are there any other techniques or methods that folks could use maybe if they can't find mackerel to target these fish?
Yeah, absolutely. We've also had fish. The first day we went out was a great day, nonetheless. There was just cows and slobs rolling on the surface, maybe a few miles offshore, and we were trolling them and hooking them up, and we were casting. I never leave the dock if I'm going to troll. I never leave the dock without having top water rods available. My setups always have a dock on them, and I've had great success with the Sabio band of anglers flying wide backs, casting them to the bass, nailing them. When we see them down deep, we've been dropping Ronzis, the 8 or 10 inch length, depending on the current and how deep I am. They're eating them as well. And for years, I just adopted the practice of using my sabiki rigs with 40-pound main line. They're constructed of heavier gauge line and case, and so I hang a A27 diamond jig on the bottom of it. And I've been catching big bass on that jig, and for the max, they would come up and eat the diamond jig. So it's pretty tough to miss when you get into the fish.
So have you noticed any patterns, Steve, from the time out on the water this spring with this group of fish that have migrated up here in terms of, are they more active earlier in the day, later in the day, specific tides that you're fishing from boat, anything that you can share with the membership?
Absolutely. Most of the fish were caught in the afternoon, full sunshine, on a dropping tide.
That's very interesting to hear.
Yeah, really. Very interesting. I've learned over the years, work with other charter captains and, being out there and learning on my own. I take a lot of records for good days and bad days and go back and review them that no matter how good a boat you have or how good a gear you have to be able to know where the fish are to catch them. And understanding the tides and the movement of the fish is very important to doing that. I taught a course at Cape Cod Community College. Just went to my surprise, the very first course in fishing in 35-year history down there. And it was a 6-week course, fishing Cape Cod Bay and beaches. And a third of the course was dedicated to understanding the tides, which way the tide moves at high, the coming tide, the dropping tide, peak currents in the tide cycle, because striped bass love current. They're going to be where the current is. So that, by far, has made me a much better and consistent fisherman, and I pass that along to all my customers and my students at the college, which was great. And a tip of the hat to Ryan again. He wasn't able to come in and speak, but he certainly took care of my last spring class. Very generous with his time and support.
One other thing, you mentioned the tides. Have you noticed, and I don't want you to burn your spots, right? But have you noticed these fish kind of setting up shop in certain areas, or have they been moving around on you?
They're in the usual spots. I find them in the spring. Any place is structure, and structure to a striped bass can be a 1-foot undulation sandbar. If the current's running from east to west, they're going to line up on the west bump there, just waiting for the bait to be trolled over. A good area that's always consistent is Scorton Creek with the ledges in there. Just know which way the current moving, and you'll find where the fish are sitting. And I know spots all the way from Billingsgate Shoal all the way across. So if I'm fishing Billingsgate Shoal on a dropping tide on the south side, as the tide gets lower and lower, I keep running east with the tide. I know where there's other structure areas all the way up to the canal where the fish just typically set up in there. There's days they don't. But
now, one thing I wanted to work in here to our conversation was, once the charter season really heats up for you, Memorial Day weekend's kind of the unofficial start of the summer, and folks really start to flood down, and your boat gets back in the water. How will your strategy change at all, if at all, when we flip the calendar into June?
The other important thing I learned about currents and tides is the moons. If you're going to fish Cape Cod, you want to fish the June moons, both the full moon and the new moon. A lot of people didn't know, but, the east of the Cape, the average tide swing is 3 feet. You get in Cape Cod Bay, the average tide swing is 10 feet. So from low to high in a normal tide, billions and billions of gallons of water come and go out of Cape Cod Bay. A lot of current there. And when the moons are there, obviously, the tides are higher. I mean, the bounds of Cape Cod Bay don't stretch, but the current has to be faster to get that water out of there in roughly a 6-hour time period. So the currents are great around the new and full moon.
And another thing I wanted to touch on with you, Steve, is the new slot limit, how that will affect your business and your customers who might be looking to take, a fish home for the table.
Yeah, I mentioned what a great spring we're going to have of those over 50 fish. I think less than a half dozen of them fit into the slot. The rest are too big. But I don't have a problem with that. I remember years ago we would fish, and it was really scraping to find 24 to 26-inch fish, and I guess it's that year class now has grown up, and those are the big ones coming through here now. So there's ups and downs about it. The 80% of my clients are catch release anyway, so it won't affect us. But some people come, they want to take home the fish, and we'll just have to work our best to get the slot fish.
And along those lines, Steve, how can folks get in touch with you if they're looking to book a charter? And, are you all sold out for the season already?
No, I'm not. I thank you for asking that. I'm on the pro staff at Goose Hummock Shop, so all my contact info's there. I'm on Instagram at Wingman Sport Fishing. I do have openings around the June moons. I typically fish one charter a day to target the right tide cycle, but on the moons, where the currents and the flows are so big, I do 2 a day. So I have some openings at both the new and full moon in June.
That's great to hear. And do you have a website as well, Steve?
Yes, wingmansportfishing.com.
Perfect. And that's another way that I'm sure folks can kind of keep tabs on what's going on with the Wingman and also get in touch, via the website should they want to book a charter.
Exactly, yeah, for sure.
We really appreciate you joining the podcast, Steve. It was great to have you back on the show, and I'm hopeful that we can do this again a couple more times before the season runs out if we can fit it into your busy charter schedule.
I'll make sure it fits in my schedule, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, up next on this week's edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast is our good buddy Lee Boisvert from down behind the counter at beautiful Riverview Bait and Tackle in Yarmouth. Lee, how are you today?
Very good.
It's been a great week. It's been a little bit breezy. We got a little bit of a north wind today that's kicking up Cape Cod Bay. How are things down your way?
Yeah, keeping some people off the water, but they're in shopping and preparing for tomorrow.
So since we last spoke, Lee, we've had a very exciting development. We've had the opening of sea bass season back on May the 20th. What's that been like for you in the shop, and what are you hearing, from your customers?
Well, it's certainly happening. Very big volume of fish, especially in this area. A lot of picking to get, though they're good size, but you're getting a majority of sublegal. I did go out with my wife on Saturday, and we probably had towards 100 fish before we got our limit, and that's off the reef off Bass River.
Were you on the, is it called the Tire Reef, Lee? Is that where you were fishing?
Well, it's known as the Tire Reef because that's what it was initially constructed with, but it has now been augmented with multiple times, at least a good half dozen times of concrete and different construction that way, that debris that is giving it a lot more structure out there, and it's really holding fish well.
And when you were fishing in that area, Lee, were you baiting your jigs to have success, or were you dropping them down unbaited?
No, we're baiting, with squid especially. The other thing, a lot of fish are eating crabs, and that certainly would be a viable bait, even for bigger fish.
And do you guys, Lee, down at Riverview still have green crab?
Yes, we do.
Well, that's good to know. I've had, a little bit of a dry spell up here in the greater Plymouth area where I live, Lee. I tried to pick some up the other day. I struck out 2 different places and ended up giving up. So it's great to know that you guys down at Riverview still have some stock. Mm-hmm. And how about eels as well? I know guys for striper fishing will be starting to look at those as well. Yeah,
eels are certainly in stock now. Not too many people use them, but guys who know are certainly doing it in all these estuaries, during the nighttime or, normal low light times.
And Lee, in terms of the striper fishery, you mentioned we're getting into the summer bite where guys will start to use eels. But what are you hearing in terms of a striper report over the last week or so since we spoke?
I'm certainly hearing stuff all around. Bigger fish in Cape Cod Bay, though there are keepers mixed in on the south side here. There's a bigger mass of fish in Cape Cod Bay of size, particularly the Billingsgate shoal area and boat trolling. A lot of XP minnow, X-Raps, those the Rapalas. So
Now, Lee, on the south side, you mentioned, the class fish might not be quite as big, but I just wanted to ask you about that area. In terms of folks coming down, Memorial Day is a big weekend, and folks are going to be not only opening up houses but getting boats in the water, and for some of those folks, they'll be poking around for the very first time this year. If you had to give some tips to folks, off the south side, Vineyard Sound, Nantucket Sound, folks that'll be kind of cruising around for the very first time looking to catch stripers this weekend, could you give some advice to those folks on, kind of areas to hit, but also what they would want to pick up if they were coming into Riverview?
Well, certainly not just stripers. There are bluefish out here. Not as much volume into the eastern end of the Sound, but there's stripers on structure, be it Bishop and Clerks or in closer at Great Island. Monomoy. Monomoy is active. Smaller fish. Haven't heard of a lot of bigger fish, but there is striper action down at the Rips Handkerchief and such down at Monomoy. I haven't heard the outside rips being active, but warmer water on the inshore rips of inside Nantucket Sound.
These fish in the rips, I'm curious, have you heard at all what they're eating? Is it squid or sand eels?
Oh, it's far majority squid.
Gotcha.
Down that way. Monomoy is a squid haven. Any squid imitation is a great item down there.
And that's what I was going to ask for you guys at Riverview, kind of what you offer to those type of fishermen that may be looking to throw stuff into those rips. What can they pick up in the shop?
Squid imitations, be it flies, be it we make shell squids up that you drift into the rips, and a variety of different lures on that idea. The Uzuri squids, and again, back to the Rapalas, those are always a good item, not that they're squid, but like I say, the squid flies on lead core line gets it down a little bit into the rips. That's extremely popular these last few years and very productive.
And Lee, I just wanted to ask you too as well about, have we reached the point in the calendar where guys have kind of made that flip from freshwater to saltwater? Or are there folks still freshwater fishing that come into the shop?
No, they're very much freshwater fishing. I wouldn't say there's been a flip yet. No, it's still cool out and a lot of people freshwater.
Can you give us a good idea of what guys are looking at, with the kettle pond bite? It's a bite that gets ignored a little bit with all the saltwater opportunities, but what are guys targeting this time of year, and what are they picking up when they come in the shop?
Just a whole variety of bass lures. The trout is quieted down, but anything from the shiners and worms for different people, but definitely going through a lot of shiners. And then haven't been selling as much on the plastics as much as the hard baits and the jerk baits and starting on spinner baits, but not quite yet.
All right, Lee, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I'm sure the shop is humming. What are the hours for the store as we head into this Memorial Day weekend?
Basically 7 to 5 daily.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee, for joining the show. We always appreciate it, and we'll look forward to catching up with you or Mac in another couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Well, next up on this week's edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast is our good friend, Evan Eastman of Eastman Sport and Tackle down in beautiful Falmouth. Evan, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Kevin. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, a little under the weather. I either got some, spring pollen allergies or maybe a little bit of a cold, but I think that's been kind of going around with everybody with all this pollen blowing off the trees.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I mean, every single car that pulls into the shop is just covered in pollen, and so, yeah, it's been crazy.
So let's start with Falmouth proper. I want to ask you a little bit about the surfcasting report over the last couple of weeks since we've last spoke, Evan. Last time when we chatted on your first visit of the season, we gave folks a little bit of a tour around the greater Falmouth area, up through New Seabury, up toward Pompanesett. We have a lot of surf casting members here at My Fishing Cape Cod. Can you give everybody a bit of a surf casting look as to what's been going on down there over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, for sure. The one thing I will say is that because the canal has been so good, a lot of my guys who regularly fish the south side have been making the trek up that way. But depending on the tide, the fishing's been pretty good. I mean, you're going to be getting into some slot and overslot fish, definitely some schoolies as well. But, the canal's just been really, really good. So, but the one thing that some people are running into, and it really depends, like say the beginning of an incoming tide might be a little difficult because of how much mung is around the south side, but there are certainly parts of the tide you can fish to kind of avoid a lot of it. And at times guys have been resorting to throwing surface plugs just to kind of, avoid some of the mung on the surface. But, there's definitely been consistent fishing, schoolies up inside the salt ponds on both sides of Falmouth, whether that's Great Pond, Green Pond, Bourne's Pond, and then, I've been fishing consistently way up inside of West Falmouth Harbor, and there's schoolies up in there too. So, the fishing's been good. It's been a little struggle at times with the weeds, but, I think moving forward here as we go into June, I think it's going to remain really good. I just started to carry eels, and so I know some guys are going to be looking to utilize those here soon. So, as the calendar turns, I think fishing is going to stay really good.
Well, it's good to hear Eastman Sport and Tackle is getting stocked up with eels, because we're getting to that time of the year where, we're in the summer and folks start to make that change, right, from the artificial lures, the topwater baits, to the eels. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Evan, something that just popped into my mind when concerning the weed. If you go to try to fish, like you said, some of the inner harbors, estuaries, the salt ponds, I know are a big fan favorite down there. Do you escape some of that weed, or is it still kind of making its way in there as well?
Yeah, it really depends on where. There's definitely a lot of fish farther up inside the salt ponds, and the farther up you go, the less weeds there are. It's really seemingly to concentrate around the entrance points. And, it seems like after, a few hours of the tide, a lot of that will get sucked up in and clear up some of those entry points. But yeah, if you're looking completely, there's definitely fish up inside, whether that's the Buzzards Bay side of Falmouth or the south side of Falmouth. It seems like the farther up you go, the less weeds you're dealing with.
And one other question I had on those areas that, folks could potentially fish here to avoid the wind in the weed, how does it differ, right, from what you're using to try to target fish, maybe in the salt ponds, maybe up in an estuary or a creek, as opposed to, let's say, being out in your waders in open water surf casting? Is there any difference as to what you'd kind of pack in your tackle bag or use?
Yeah, I mean, in years past, a lot of the fishing done way up inside is, primarily schoolies. So if I'm targeting primarily schoolies, everything's sized down, mostly topwater stuff, because it's obviously super fun to catch them that way, but it's also very effective. So, if I'm fishing way up inside of West Falmouth Harbor, I'm almost exclusively throwing surface plugs, whether that's like a small jumping minnow, one of those junior super small ones, or and occasionally I'll throw like a little turtle-tailed grub, like a white one with a grub head, if I do find that I want a subsurface approach to catching them. But it's primarily surface stuff, and then on the outside, I just listened to Calvin's podcast. So if you're into surf casting, I would definitely give that a listen. But more often than not, you're dealing with more wind on the outside, so you want something to punch through the wind and can get down subsurface. So on the outside, more of heavier plugs, more bucktails, and on the inside, more surface plugs, and everything seems to be sized down a little bit.
Awesome. Now let's flip the switch a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about the boat bite. That's something that you've had a chance to do a little bit more this year. I know it's tough running the bait shop and with all the demands on your time there, but it sounded like the last time we spoke, you had a decent opportunity so far this spring and into the early part of the summer to get out on the boat. I know we talked a lot about Vineyard Sound and Middle Ground the last time we visited. Give us an update on how the fishing is over in Vineyard Sound.
Yeah, the fishing's been absolutely fantastic. I've been to Middle Ground 4 times in the last week, mostly after work, but I was able to get out there early yesterday morning, and it's been pretty consistent with, 30 to 35-inch fish. Last Friday I did really well, got like 8 or 9 mid-30-inch size fish. Same thing, I went out on Sunday, and then yesterday got out there at 6 a.m. and probably lost count after 20 fish, but it was pretty much every cast. Once I found where the fish were holding on the rip, I was throwing an amber-colored popper, the hoagie popper, and it seemed like every time I got it into this one spot, I was hooked up. So a lot of weeds at Middle Ground. That's why I primarily would like to, throw surface plugs there. Trying to throw something subsurface, whether it's a soft plastic paddle tail, an epoxy jig, it's been a challenge just because of the mung and the weeds there. But man, the surface bite's been fantastic. So before the turn of the tide yesterday, I zipped over from Middle Ground to Hedge Fence, and there was tons of action there, tons of turns, caught about 8 or 9 fish in 20 minutes, and they were all relatively small. There were sub 28-inch fish, but there was no shortage of them. Pretty sure they were feeding on sand eels, but one of them I caught had spit up some baby squid. So then after that, I zipped back to Middle Ground, waited for the tide to turn, and then it was about 11:30 was the first part of that incoming tide, and it's the same thing pretty much. A lot more boat traffic there, but I was still getting the popper in the rip, and it was a really good day. Certainly a day I'll remember in January when I'm doing inventory and it's 20 degrees out. It was an awesome day in the water yesterday.
Now, are you hearing reports too, Evan, of any bigger fish moving into the area, or you think we still have to wait a little bit into June for some maybe really, I'll say, class quality fish to move into those areas?
Well, actually, one of my customers, he's probably I would say the most experienced fisherman who's not a professional fisherman. He's been doing it for 40 years. He's out in the water almost every day, and he's been doing really well in Woods Hole, casting the Wonder Bread colored, you can call it a couple different things, but that multicolored bomber. And he's been getting, mid to high slot fish and over slot fish there. So he's been doing really well there. And I know that guys, fishing a little bit deeper. I've seen some guys jigging wire off a West Chop, and I know there's some bigger fish on the bottom than are feeding in the rips. So I definitely talked to a handful of guys who have been jigging wire, whether it's Middle Ground, Woods Hole, or in Buzzards Bay. They've been jigging up some pretty good fish. So I do think there's going to be a push of bigger fish coming through. But right now, if you're looking to target some really nice mid-30s, 30-inch size fish, Middle Ground's pretty much the place to be. And then, Woods Hole is loaded as well.
It's the unofficial start to summer for a lot of folks here on the Cape. If you had to give some advice to folks, maybe looking to target some of these fish for the first time this year, or maybe they're coming into Eastman Sport and Tackle and, looking to pick up a few things to maybe make their first striper trip of the season successful. Any advice you would give to those folks that just really haven't been a part of the fishery yet that might be diving in headfirst this weekend?
For sure. So, if they're boat fishing for striped bass, there's primarily squid on the south side. So on myself and I, seeing yesterday, almost everybody I saw fishing had an amber-colored lure. So whether that's a popper, whether that's a spook, I personally have been fishing the popper recently, and just it's been so successful. I really haven't had a reason to change. So that's something I would focus on. You know, in years past, obviously a lot of people using paddle tails and things of that nature, but you know, just with the current environment the way it is, you're just really going to want to present something on the surface. If you're interested in, you know, maybe you're a beginner, you might want to go over to hedge fence, throw in some epoxy jigs because it's super easy. You're going to catch a lot of fish. There's going to be less boat traffic, and there's no shortage of fish over there. So I might, you know, basically when I go out, I have one rod with a popper, one rod with an epoxy jig, and depending on, you know, where I am, it's going to dictate what I throw. And also, you know, we've been talking about striped bass so far, but sea bass kicked off last Saturday, fluke on Sunday. I know the guys over the past week have done really well catching sea bass at the wrecks off of Oak Bluffs. I mean, there's a number of different places you can get them in Vineyard Sound. In Buzzards Bay's had them as well. So, you know, if you're looking for, you know, something that you can do with a family that's easy, relatively speaking, and a lot of fun, and obviously sea bass are very tasty, that's something that you could do. And, you know, we tie our own sea bass rigs, so we recommend those, but we got a number of different style of rigs. We got some metal jigs, some bucktails, can certainly point you in the right direction for sea bass. And then if you're going to be fishing on the Buzzards Bay side of things, there's been a lot more pogies over there. So I would probably have a bone-colored spook, you know, if I was fishing in Upper Buzzards Bay, whether that's the dock, you know, you get the Hoagie Dog Walker, the Daddy Mac A-Bomb, things of that nature, the Head and Super Spook, something like that is what I would throw if you can find those pogie schools. There's been a lot more bluefish in Buzzards Bay than on the south side of Falmouth, so you might run into some bluefish over there. So because of that, I'd probably avoid using soft plastics and focus on the hard baits that have a rattle, whether that's a surface plug or a swim plug.
And the last thing I wanted to ask you about, Evan, is with the holiday weekend coming up, you know, can you clue us in on the store hours for the shop?
For sure. Tomorrow, Friday, we're going to be open 8 to 6 p.m., 7 to 6 on Saturday, 7 to 6 on Sunday. And, yeah, it looks like the weather's going to be good. Certainly the Cape is going to be very busy. There should be a lot of boats out there fishing, too. So anticipate, you know, some really good fishing this weekend, you know, whether you're targeting sea bass, scup, striped bass, bluefish. Seems like everything's around, and yeah, we'll be open for everything you need.
All right, Evan, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of your week with us. It's always a treat talking to you, and we'll look forward to catching up on our next visit in a couple of weeks in June.
All right, thanks, Kevin. I really appreciate your time, and have a great weekend.
My thanks to Evan Eastman of Eastman Sport and Tackle down in beautiful Falmouth, Massachusetts, for joining us on this week's show. And I just want to take a moment to thank all of our guests that took time out of their busy Memorial Day week schedules to join today's program, starting with MFCC founder and creator Ryan Collins, Sam Mullen of the Goose Hummock Shop, Captain Steve Leary of Wingman Charters, Lee Boisvert from Riverview Bait and Tackle, and last but not least, Evan Eastman of Eastman Sport and Tackle. What an action-packed show we had in store for you today. The program was chock full of a lot of tasty tidbits and information that should help everybody be successful when fishing this Memorial Day weekend. So hopefully, let me be one of the first to wish you and yours a happy and healthy, safe Memorial Day weekend here on Cape. From everybody here at My Fishing Cape Cod, happy Memorial Day 2023. And that's going to put the wraps on this edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast, brought to you by Cape and Islands Mitsubishi and Cape Codder Boats. And this is your host, Kevin Collins, signing off. And until we chat again next week, tight lines and take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast. For the latest local news, information, and fishing reports, be sure to log on to myfishingcapecod.com. From all of us at My Fishing Cape Cod, tight lines and take care.